Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to RoundTable Talk, where I dissect, analyse and review the latest releases as well as some old classics. We're finally back with the latest edition of this RoundTable Revisit series, going through the discography of Drake. We've belatedly made it all the way to More Life. Yeah, I'm excited to get into it, but before I do, please do remember to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and follow me on all the social links below. Really appreciate that. And if you're interested in going back through Drake's discography from the very beginning, do head back across the channel to the Drake playlist, which will be linked in the description box below. So, More Life, Drake's playlist album, I guess you'd call it. As I said on my Views Revisit, that album saw Drake reach his sort of mainstream pinnacle. It's the album where Drake became this iconic artist, really, in the world of pop at the very least. But as I said on my review, it's clear on Views, mostly to big Drake fans, I would say, that Drake did hold listeners at arm's length a little bit, didn't go into too much depth during that album, as it seems, as a consequence of, the anger and the sense of betrayal they still felt at that time over the Meek Mill beef, as well as other people who had come out and dissed him during this time period. I think it's clear that the second half of Drake's career has been dominated by the sense of paranoia that began after that beef, or maybe even just before in 2015. That paranoia is explored in the cold and dark, isolated tone of "If you're reading this, it's too late." Then, the aggression that follows that on "What a Time to Be Alive." And then, as I said, the resulting sort of emptiness on Views. I feel like the major theme of Views really, despite, as I said, the arbitrary concept, Views finds Drake as a writer and as an artist trying to find this sort of sense of purpose within himself. It's very, very insular, with very little collaborative work, and, as people have said, a sort of lack of inspiration. And by the end of the album, he doesn't really come to any real conclusions and seems to remain very much in his own head, especially if you go off the outro of that album. But interestingly, More Life does the absolute opposite. Sees Drake over the course of that project find a sort of peace in opening himself up to other cultures, to caring less about what people think of him, and just being more fluid in his own artistic identity, I'd say. Despite all this though, I will say that the sort of trajectory that Drake is on following More Life, coming through the second half of his career, is kind of dented and taken completely off course by the Pusha T beef, which would follow this project in 2018. But still, let's get back to just before More Life. Drake is still seemingly at odds with a lot of people within hip-hop at the very least. While Views was, commercially massively successful, as I said, it met criticism for feeling a little bit uninspired and a little bit middle of the road, particularly by, Drake's stan and former friend, I would believe, Joe Budden, who of course has gone on to great success as a broadcaster. And again, Drake shows the level of inspiration that conflict does actually breed in him by releasing another of his timestamp records called 4 PM in Calabasas, which sees him diss both Joe Budden as well as P. Diddy. And I'd go as far as to say that 4 PM in Calabasas probably is the peak, really, of paranoid, arrogant Drake, in the sort of level of braggadocio that he engages in on that track. It's one of my favourite displays of lyricism from Drake, in that he also is able to weave quite a bit of melody, humour, and just really great lyricism into that track. Of course, he also disses Budden on French Montana's song No Shopping. That diss obviously led to a plethora of disses from Joe Budden, which Drake chose not to respond to, which in hindsight is really interesting that Drake did choose to respond to Pusha T and not to Joe Budden, both two veteran MCs with a lot of hip-hop credibility. And potentially the MC and Drake could no longer take it, after ignoring Joe's, I think maybe 7 disses. He then felt compelled to respond when Pusha would eventually go at him. But also, prior to More Life, Drake also released the track 2 Birds, 1 Stone, amidst continued tension with good music artists. Drake and Kanye during this time period seemed relatively cool, felt very much like they were gearing up for a lot of collaboration and potentially a joint album during this time period. But as I said, Drake released the 2 Birds, 1 Stone track over a Kanye production, which in hindsight feels a little bit sly and a little bit backhanded, in that he chose to diss Pusha T, and in that he chose to respond to Pusha T's, you know, little subs here and there, and Kid Cudi's famous tweet discrediting Drake as a top 5 MC. But I would say, you know, two birds, one stone, despite again being another fantastic example of conflict breeding pretty immense lyricism from Drake as a writer. It might be one of the biggest missteps, I would say, in his career, let alone, you know, the flack he got for, you know, taking potential shots at Kid Cudi's mental health, but also that Pusha's response to this is the track Infrared from 2018, which led to, you know, a beef that Drake quite dramatically lost. But still, two birds, one stone, fantastic song. As I said, you know, the cloud of tension, of beef, of conflict remains hanging over Drake's career as it had done since 2015, going into More Life. But as I said, it feels as though Drake, going into this record, is still trying his best to move away from that aggression, and try and find some kind of peace, some kind of happiness. And clearly, you know, More Life was debuted on OVO Sound Radio, the collaboration with Apple Music. And the project itself is labelled a playlist, trying, I think, you know, obviously to avoid the expectations and the obligations of a full Drake album. But as I said, inspired by, you know, that sort of format on OVO Sound Radio, it's another way for Drake to cover all bases, in the same way that Views tried to as well, you know, engaging in lots of different styles, but this time with, you know, a better conceit, I'd say, than Views' seasonal one. This feels much more refined, much more thought out, I'd say, and it does feel very much like a radio show. I think one of the subtitles for this album is a playlist curated by the October firm, which I think Drake said was himself, his manager Oliver, and 40. And I think this is the first project that lists Oliver as an executive producer since So Far Gone, which in itself says, I think, quite a lot about Oliver's ability as a curator. And I think he's an understated and underappreciated element of Drake's career. In terms of sequencing, I would say that More Life probably is the best sequenced Drake record, up there with So Far Gone. So I do hope, you know, going forward, that Oliver is, you know, a little bit more involved, I guess, in that side of things with, you know, Drake projects. But yeah, thematically, it's very much the same as the past two projects, I'd say, from Drake. But, you know, the worldly sounds allow him to dabble in the diaspora or black sounds, I guess, that he decides to dive into on this album, allow him to channel different elements of his personality, different elements of himself as an artist, but also, as I said, push him on this journey towards peace and to refinding, I think, himself as an artist and finding his own identity after, you know, such a I would say traumatic experience over the previous few years. The grime influences allow him to, you know, channel his paranoid bars into a place where it fits, while the sort of dancehall, Afrobeats, house elements allow Drake to more authentically dive into more worldly sounds. I think, but the lack of a clear, like, relationship, I think, around this time also plays a key part in More Life. It seems as though he's in a lot of casual relationships during this time, you know, with Jorja Smith, Jennifer Lopez, as well as, you know, many others that we won't know about, of course, which means I think there's an emptiness to a lot of the love songs from you know, 2016, 2017 Drake. But I think importantly, they're a lot less sappy and a lot less pop than previous work. As a body of work, I think More Life attempts plenty of different styles, and there almost feels like a lack of purpose to the album, which shouldn't be a good thing, but I think in this case is actually one of the project's best qualities, in that it doesn't really have any pretensions. It tries to be this fluid attempt at different styles, scattershot ideas, half ideas. Some songs are really short, some songs are really long, and it just feels a lot of the time like Drake is experimenting, and as I said, trying to find a new direction, and in doing so is able to tap into what made Drake cool originally, in that he wasn't afraid to try different styles and to try different things. And on More Life, it feels like he's almost re-energized throughout the project to continue to do that, to continue to try different ways of bending his sound and bending his voice. But yeah, the quality is really high across this entire project. I think it's a very underrated project as well in Drake's discography. I think the playlist moniker, I think, rubbed a few people the wrong way, and I can see why. It does feel a bit like a cheat code. At the same time, like I said, More Life's lack of, you know, arbitrary direction is in fact its direction, which I think works very well here. And as I said, is a very great project. And speaking of OVO Sound Radio, I think More Life is an extension really of that platform. There's something about OVO Sound Radio that always felt a little bit like an exclusive club, in that, you know, it felt like, you know, it felt like being introduced to new cool music that not many people knew about, much like the OVO blog did way back when in launching the likes of The Weeknd. And in the lead up to this record, it pointed towards Drake's direction, his interest in worldly sounds, as I said, his collaboration with Wizkid and Skepta, bringing together, you know, three nations on more traditional Afro beats, as well as Drake's remix to the track Wanna Know with Dave, as well as the track Sneaking with 21 Savage, all of which are, you know, very different types of songs. And also the big hit, Fake Love, the lead single, I guess, for this project. One that we'll talk about on part 2 of this revisit. But the real difference and the experimentation and as I said before, the worldly sounds incorporated into all of this really did point towards Drake's direction going into this project and just where his head's at. But yeah, I'm going to stop rambling on. Let's dive into the first track of More Life, called Free Smoke.
I couldn't get a bill paid, you couldn't buy the real thing, but we all so spoiled now. More life, more everything. Must've never had your phone tapped. Free smoke, ayy. Free smoke. I drunk text J-Lo, old number so it bounced back. Boy, wonder got to bounce back. Girls wouldn't even think of recording me. I fall asleep in sororities. I had some different priorities. A lot of niggas going bad on me, please, one at a time. I didn't listen to Hov on that old song when he told me pay it no mind. And I seen a lot of you die. Free smoke, ayy. Yeah, you already know, yeah. I'm the troublemaker in the neighborhood, far as troublemaking goes, yeah. How you let a kid fighting ghosts, writing rumors turn into a ghost. Oh, you niggas got jokes. Free smoke.
It's clear from the outset that More Life is going to be a very different project to Views. When you look back and think about, you know, this track compared to the intro to Views, which was Keep the Family Close, worlds apart. It sees Drake, you know, continuing the aggression and the arrogance that Winning the Meat Beef had bred in him. This track would have fit neatly on If Reading This Is Too Late, and I think, you know, gives More Life initially that mixtape feel, where it would be easy to expect to hear this kind of Drake throughout. You know, on his last 2 mixtapes, this is what he sounded like. It doesn't quite go that way, and I think Free Smoke is probably the most obviously aggressive track with that ringing beat from Boy Wonder, I think it is, and just the aggression in Drake's flow. It's interesting that, you know, the sample of a band called, I think they're called Hiatus Coyote, they're an Australian band, and again, it's the sample that opens the project, and this band being from Australia, I think, you know, initially sets the tone as this is going to be an album that draws from lots of different cultures all over the world, and it's got a very global sound. For me, it's not a standout Drake intro, but I think it does its job well in setting the tone and differentiating this project from mainstream Drake, and also instantly shows that he's got more, you know, fire in his belly. If the last thing you listened to from Drake was, you know, the last track of Views, and then this track, you would hear the fire in his belly, and the level of inspiration has definitely gone up a notch in the intervening time between Views as a project and this one. It's the epitome of his paranoid arrogance, you know, literally saying, you know, he's got free smoke, free shots, free barbs for anybody who's coming at him, and he gives this aura of feeling untouchable, I guess, on this song. We find out later on that he's not, but, you know, at this point in his career, it felt as though Drake was, you know, untouchable in that sense. He continues to take shots at Meek Mill, of course, but also at Tory Lanez, who he takes shots at throughout this project, as well as maybe some little shots at Kid Cudi as well. As always with Drake, he's unable to rap about anything other than what's going on in his own mind or going on in his own life, and he can't stop himself from continuing to talk about all of the conflicts that surround this, despite saying, you know, that he's not talking about the beef anymore directly, and not performing back to back and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the whole track is wrought with the sense of betrayal that we got on tracks like Summer 16 and or If You're Reading This It's Too Late. It's also interesting, again, as I said, he gives this sort of, this aura of feeling bulletproof, and that, you know, I think quite arrogantly mentions Kanye West in, you know, a tongue-in-cheek kind of way, as though he's the troublemaker in the neighborhood. As I said on previous revisits, I think Drake definitely underestimated the effect that these little barbs and these little, you know, playful shots and playful mentions had on Kanye West, in that Kanye West clearly harbours a great resentment for Drake for whatever reason. But there's also, you know, around this time, I don't think Drake and Jay-Z had patched up their sort of silent war of words up until, I think, after this project. And on Free Smoke, he mentions his and Jay's previous collaboration, Light Up, all the way back in 2010, on which Jay-Z gives Drake a lot of advice about avoiding beef. And the way that he mentions it could be seen as quite derogatory, in that he said he didn't listen to Jay-Z back then, or hasn't listened to Jay-Z. And again, just this feeling of, you know, Drake setting himself up for a fall a little bit on Free Smoke. Maybe that's what we get in hindsight, but he sounds as though he thinks he's untouchable and can't be defeated on this track. And I think it's an interesting way to start this project, especially when you look at the sort of the journey that he goes on this record, in terms of, at the beginning of this project, he's clearly in a sense of turmoil in his own identity and in his own you know, peace of mind, and that's something that he tries to find throughout this record. But yeah, I wouldn't say Free Smoke's one of my favourite Drake intros, but I think it's a really perfect intro for this project. Let's move on to the next track, called No Long Talk, featuring Giggs.
That's Baka, he's a no long talker. Quick to let the motherfucking text slam. Get dipped from the whole ends. If Gilla call shots, no questions. If it's a chit chat thing, better talk nice. Murder on the beat, so it's not nice. Just no man like me, I'm a 6-on, and I oversee the whole thing. Yeah, I pre the whole thing. Niggas wanna talk splits, now we need the whole thing.
Man get stuck when we touch a button. Man get stuck in, yeah, we stuck in something. And the monster is like a truck or something. Man gone Hollywood, it's like I'm bucking something.
So I think amongst Drake fans, No Long Talk and, you know, Giggs' appearances on this playlist are quite divisive and quite controversial. Obviously, being from the UK, Giggs is a legend, in my opinion. But I think it's more interesting to hear, you know, the way Drake's talking on his verse on this song. You know, he's incorporated a lot of British / Toronto / you know, Jamaican slang. And you know, in the lead up to this record, he released a short film called Please Forgive Me, which featured a lot of the music from Views, and was based in the Caribbean, and saw Drake sort of leaning into the sort of gang culture life, influenced by, you know, the likes of, you know, Popcorn, Unruly, and all those guys, that, you know, he's been, you know, dabbling in since If You're Reading This It's Too Late, since that other short film back then called Jungle. I would say Please Forgive Me is, you know, a little bit cheesy, and just not as good as it could have been. But as I said, it points towards the direction that Drake was going in, and, you know, on this track is an extension, I guess, of grime, and probably is one of the most obvious moments, or most blatantly obvious moments, of Drake saying, I might be soft, I might oversee the whole thing, as he says, but my friends are involved, and my friends are the ones you should be afraid of, and you shouldn't test me because of who my friends are. Drake's fascination with, you know, Caribbean gang culture, UK gang culture, I think all stems from, you know, obviously an interest, but also I think, you know, trying to protect himself as well, from, you know, the assault of hip-hop generally against him. In terms of the beat, obviously really hard-hitting from Murder Beats and I think Q Beats as well. It's very much a mixtape track, only I think just over 2 minutes. feels like If Reading This Is Too Late with a bit more of a grime twist, obviously with Gigs on it. And while I think Gigs' verse is okay, it's typically fun. And I think the main thing about this verse that I like is that Gigs, while being sort of more drawn into, I think, the mainstream hip-hop, American hip-hop world, he stays very much himself, and neither he nor Skepta later on in the track list compromise their own sounds, their own Britishness on any of these songs. But yeah, as I said, I think the whole song, the inclusion of Gigs, is Drake attempting again, after being this mainstream pop star, as he was on Views, again to reaffirm his street cred without actually obviously being street, and hinting at again his so-called mob ties, which have become more and more prevalent in his music over the years. So yeah, More Life starts in a very aggressive, tone-setting way, very much feeling like a mixtape. And I think it's here that the sort of radio show feel really starts to kick in. Between each track there's usually a vocal snippet from anyone from Gigs to Lil Wayne to Dave throughout this project. But I think the eclecticism of the music is really emphasised by jumping from track 2, which is No Long Talk, to the next track, which is Passionfruit.
Listen, seeing you got ritualistic, passionate from miles away, passive with the things you say, harder building trust from a distance, leaving, you're just doing that to get even, passing up on my always, I can't blame you now.
I think it's obvious throughout Drake's discography, and if you go back and look at any of my revisits, I think I'm quite consistent in that I've said that Drake's at his best when he tries less hard, and I think Passionfruit is a really fantastic example of it. I think it's probably one of the best Drake songs ever in terms of writing, and in terms of how well he actually nails the happy, sad vibe that Passionfruit pretty much exudes. He finds a really interesting twist on, housey, tropical music that I can't really think of any artist who's sort of replicated this kind of style and done it so well. And while the intro is a little bit annoying when you play Passionfruit at a party or something, it again, in the context of the album, the Moody Man intro where it cuts off and rewinds, it really, again, just lends itself to the conceit of this project that, as I said before, I think works really well. Topically, I don't think it's that different to what Drake was talking about on the likes of, Take Care and Nothing Was the Same in, the long distance relationship that it explores, but it's vague enough to apply to long distance relationships in general, or to somebody, you used to date. And again, I think it's just a real triumph of Drake style writing. The religious references within the track are really great, as well as his cadence, and the semantics of the word passion that Drake really does sort of explore in a lot of different ways throughout the track, which I think is quite subtle as well, the way that it's done. Again, it's just an element of Drake as a great songwriter, not just a lyricist, not just a rapper, but a fantastic songwriter, in that he explores the meanings behind the word passion. And I think there's an irony, in this song, that, Drake is kind of suggesting that his passion is his weakness, and that's why he tries to keep making these dysfunctional relationship works, because of, his weakness for passion. He did in the relationships he talks about on, Views, Nothing Was the Same. But here on More Life, it seems like he's recognizing and trying to work on that passion, and maybe learning when to give up and when to stop caring about what people think, which I think is part of the journey that Drake goes on through More Life. That seems to be the evolution of Drake as a man. So it's really interesting when you look at this song in the context of Drake and the context of Drake's evolution as a man, as a human being. It's something that's very subtle. It's buried within a pop song, but it definitely shows a difference in attitude to the Drake that we've known since the beginning of his career. Yeah, Passionfruit, again, as I said, I think will if it had a video or something, I feel like this song would have been a much bigger success or commercial success than it was. But I think Passionfruit is one of those songs that is a real sleeper in Drake's discography. If you ask anybody who doesn't really even like or know Drake that well, pretty much everybody loves this song. And again, it's different to anything that he's ever done before. So yeah, just a real triumph of songwriting, of sonics, and just one of More Life's best tracks. But yeah, let's move on to the next track called Jorja Interlude.
Tryna stay light on my toes. Told me I'm looking exhausted. You hit it right on the nose. I practice good over evil. You out here telling everybody everything. You niggas move like the 1-2. Yeah.
A short but sweet interlude, which I think just again highlights a lot of the things I've already mentioned over the past 2 Drake projects, that Drake struggles to understand that, you know, or appreciate his position at the top of the game, the success that he's had in, you know, both pop and in rap. Creates him as a target for other people, out of jealousy, out of envy, but also, you know, as I said before, some of his own actions do come across as very arrogant at times, which, you know, is partly understandable, but it also should explain to him why so many people do diss him. Lyrically, Drake emphasizes the tiredness that has come across in Drake's music from 2016 onwards. It feels like he personally has struggled to find a lot of joy in the music that you hear these days. There was a lot more joy, I think, back, you know, at the beginning of his career, but over this time he's become more flat, I guess, as an artist in his music. There's obviously moments of fun, but there's much less of it, I think, within the music anyway. The Jorja Smith sample is really well done, as is, you know, the interpolation of the Stevie Wonder harmonica solo from Doing It Wrong. This track definitely feels like it could have fit on Take Care in terms of, you know, the subject matter and sonically. I think it's produced by 40. As I've said before, I think the best Drake tracks sound like conversations, and this one in particular, even though the verse is very short, feels like a conversation that Drake has in the car with, you know, a woman that he's seeing at the time who's telling him how he looks and how he sounds these days. And it just emphasizes that, you know, it feels as though Drake has very little people to share this sense of betrayal with, and he apparently is doing so with whoever this unnamed woman is. You know, this woman could be, you know, Jorja Smith, in that, you know, the interlude is named after her, but I think it's more important that the interlude is named after her, in that it feels as though over the years Drake has always had some kind of female muse, from, you know, when he was growing up it would have been Aaliyah, to then move over to, you know, Rihanna. Obviously he had a relationship with Rihanna, and I think their breakup definitely stopped her from being his muse, and it feels as though, you know, in later years someone like Jorja Smith, who it seems as though, you know, saw Drake casually but rejected his advances from something more serious, definitely took on and has taken on that status, as we'll talk about a little bit more on the Scorpion, I would say. But yeah, a great little interlude, a great little insight again into where Drake's head really is at on More Life, and the continued journey that he's going to go through throughout this album. We get all the bluster on Free Smoke and on No Long Talk, and then on you know, Passionfruit and Jorja Interlude, we start to see the growth and the reflection that Drake is going through on this record, which in my opinion is the polar opposite to what you get on Views, where, you know, we don't really see any kind of progress. But yeah, anyway, as this is a playlist, this interlude transitions perfectly into the next track called Get It Together. This time actually featuring Jorja Smith, as well as interpolating Black Coffee as well. Yeah, let's get into it.
You need me to get that shit together so we could get together. Give me a kiss goodnight. You need me to.
So I'll be honest, I would say Get It Together is probably one of my least favourite tracks on More Life. I do appreciate, you know, the effort that Drake has definitely gone here to be a little bit experimental, and I think he and Jorja Smith have, you know, fantastic chemistry on the track. With Jorja pretty much channeling, you know, Amy Winehouse levels of vocals on that, and of course, you know, the Black Coffee sample is, you know, a classic. I almost feel like this is a really perfect example of, you know, the experimental element of More Life, in that this feels very much probably the biggest example of this being a half idea. It feels a little bit unfinished, a little bit of a riff over this beat. Drake's, you know, not too present. I wish that there was more from him on this, in terms of maybe a verse or verses, and more of a duet, I guess, between him and Jorja, barring the hook. But yeah, there's also a tendency, you know, because this is supposed to be a playlist, it's meant to be a lot more fluid, a lot more free. And the tendency is that, you know, some songs on More Life are really short, and some are maybe a little bit overlong, a little bit indulgent. And I think Get It Together is probably like that too, with, you know, the long musical breakdown. But lyrically, again, I think it continues the theme here of growth in Drake, in that he's referring to the necessity of taking, you know, personal responsibility for making his relationships work. In this sense, getting it together so they could get together. Drake is often, you know, held up as a poster child of toxicity sometimes, or, you know, toxic masculinity, in that he seems to put a lot of blame on his previous partners and not himself. I disagree with that notion. If you listen to enough Drake, you can see that he does have enough sort of self-awareness to know that he's often to blame, or at least, you know, or at least jointly to blame for the, you know, falling apart of some of his relationships. But on this track in particular, and I think throughout More Life, there's definitely a more noticeable effort towards self-improvement for the benefit of others. Beat-wise, this is, again, like I said, samples a classic, but again brings in just more worldly sounds, more sounds that Drake hasn't really approached thus far, up until this point. You know, bringing in the snippet of Burna Boy at the end, as I said, Black Coffee. The only probably weird element of this track is that snippets of this track leaked on social media, I think a fair while before More Life, and featured the vocals of Jennifer Lopez, who I think Drake was probably in a relationship with at that point. And it's interesting that she was then replaced by Jorja Smith, who it seems has gone on to become a muse for Drake, as I said previously. But yeah, as I said, you know, Get It Together, it's okay. It feels, ironically, as it follows an interlude, it feels to me more of an interlude than the previous track. And I think Jorja Interlude and this track do go well very together, and again, it's just a great example of the great sequencing on this album. But yeah, let's move on to the next track, one of my favourites, Madiba Riddim. Let's go.
I cannot tell who is my friend. Gonna have to teach me how to love you again. God knows I'm trying. Anointed and protected, I was chosen. I see men turn fool for the money one too many times. Voodoo spells put on my life. It won't work, they all have tried. I see men turn fool for the money one too many times.
I do love Madiba Riddim. I think it's one of the sleeper hits again on this playlist. It's not too lyrically deep, but, you know, details Drake's journey through the world of fame, and the obvious thing, you know, Drake has struggled to maintain, you know, friendships and relationships, many of those affected by money and all sorts of other things. But I do appreciate that whenever Drake does make a, you know, dancehall, or in this case maybe more Afrobeats influenced song, there is a real darkness a lot of the time to the lyrics of what he's putting together, which in itself is in the spirit of the genre. It would be very easy for Drake to write a lot of happier lyrics in this more upbeat and almost sunny soundscape that is definitely on this track. But like his verse on Rihanna's Work, for example, he talks a lot about death on these types of tracks, and there's also an increased reference to, you know, the influences that, you know, higher powers or the supernatural has had on Drake's career and Drake's life, which I think is just a really interesting element of him as an artist that, you know, isn't really mentioned that often when Drake's sort of writing and work is brought up, really. Having these tracks that are way more upbeat on the surface be infused with the same kind of paranoia that you got on If You're Reading This It's Too Late is really interesting, and is a way, I think, of Drake to be able to make happier music, but still is evidence that he's still stuck in his own head, really, during this period of time, and very affected by the effects of the betrayal that he suffered in the second half, or the betrayals that he feels he suffered in the second half of his career. Yeah, not too much to say though on Madiba Riddim, just a really great, happy track, really well produced as well by I think 1985, one half of Division, as well as I think Frank Dukes. But yeah, I think Madiba Riddim also functions as almost part one of a two-headed track, with the second half being the next track called Blem.
Unruly, my dads. Who keeps bringing more? I've had too many. I'm Blem for real. I might just say how I feel. Cause I know what I like. I know how I wanna live my life. You're not here and we both know why. So move for me when you're extra. Cause you're crazy sometimes. And I only see you sometimes. You move with me, I go look, just don't switch on me. I got big plans.
The Blem actually marks the return of T-, who hadn't really produced any tracks for Drake since Take Care, so back in 2011. So been a good 6 years. I think he'd retired in that intervening time. And if you go back and watch my Take Care reaction, you'll see how much I love the work of T-, and while it's a very different style, I think Blem is a really fantastically produced song, in that it's really simple, but there's so much going on in the beat, almost deceptively so. The thing I find about both Madiba Riddim and Blem are that they feel a lot more authentically Afrobeats and authentically dancehall than previous attempts, I guess, from Drake, which felt a little bit watered down for the mainstream. And I think that lends itself to the idea that More Life didn't really cater to the mainstream at all. In a lot of these tracks, as I said before, feel like riffing on ideas, feel like just moments of experimentation, and moments that, unlike most of Views, didn't feel like they'd been overthought. They were just Drake having fun in the studio and putting out music, and that lends itself to the mixtape, playlist, radio feel of this whole project. Yeah, not too much depth to this track at all, but it's an obvious banger. Also pretty much an ode to alcohol, which is something that Drake talks about a lot in his music, which points towards the reliance he actually does have on alcohol, but that's a more serious conversation, I guess, maybe not for a track like Blem. A really interesting use of the Lionel Richie All Night Long sample at the end, again just adding to that sort of loose jam session or almost feel of this project, as well as the little sort of sample of Lil Wayne speaking at the end, and in that sense I think OVO Sound Radio and just OVO in general are and were pretty much ahead of the curve. When you look now in 2020, 2019, so many artists have podcasts, radio shows, like The Weeknd, Wayne himself, as well as so many other artists as well. And it feels as though OVO really did kind of quietly pioneer the trend, at least in the music industry. But yeah, love Blem, really infectious. You can't help but just want to dance when you hear that song. Although I can see why, especially with the way that this playlist started, why many fans might have started to tire of dancehall Drake by this point, really. Me personally, I love dancehall Drake, so I don't really get tired of it. I think it's pretty timeless music, but I can see why those people who prefer rapping Drake or pure R&B Drake may have got a little bit tired by this point. But yeah, like Madiba Riddim ends on a vocal snippet from Toronto rap battles. Blem ends with a little spoken word from Lil Wayne, which itself leads straight into 4422, performed by Sampler.
I'm running but can't run away. 44, 22.
The way the drums come in on this is fantastic.
Just make the call. 44, 22. Outer space, pearly gates.
I think 4422 is a great example of More Life as a project, just allowing things to breathe. Up until this point, it's been very much Drake focused, apart from Get It Together. But even then, there's little breaks in this playlist where Drake sort of just sees the spotlight and allows other people to shine, which is something I think that Views really didn't. Obviously here it's Sampler, who Drake's collaborated with in the past on Too Much, From Nothing Was the Same. But I think the ability that Drake has to find hidden talent, I guess, and to bring it to the mainstream is one of his greatest strengths, and something I think he didn't, something, as I said, he didn't do enough on Views, and tried to do everything himself, which I think led to a little bit of, you know, oversaturation, as well as the uninspired undertone, I guess, to the album. But yeah, 4422 allows a fantastic vocal performance from Sanfa, some beautiful piano, which, you know, I think he often plays himself. I really do love the way the drums come into that track later on as well. Usually interludes like this, where Drake gives the spotlight to another singer, often like The Weeknd or Party Next Door, usually expand on the themes of a project. One More Life, you know, being a playlist, isn't as thematically dense as, you know, Take Care or Nothing Was the Same. I do think that this track, despite its, you know, almost vague lyrical references, does refer to, you know, a relationship falling apart halfway through, which is something that Drake has sort of hinted at, I guess, throughout previous tracks. There are a lot of theories about this song though, in terms of whether Sanfa himself is actually referring to the issues in Sierra Leone, as well as the sort of religious references as well, which again are in keeping with a lot of the sort of higher power references that Drake has, you know, slipped in there in different songs over this time period. And again, I think Drake's relationship with, you know, spirituality is something that's not often touched on when again talking about his work. I do believe that Drake at least placed this in the track list, Drake or Oliver, to symbolise a relationship falling apart. Again, transition wise, the piano from this song leads straight into the chilling piano of the next track, Gyalchester.
Hermes Link, Ice Blue Mink, stay at the top like I'm stuck, that's just how I'm giving it up. I don't take naps, I'm so hot, yeah, I'm so right now. I switch flow like I switch time zone. I know I said top 5, but I'm top 2, and I'm not 2, and I got one, thought you had one, but it's not one, nigga, no.
I think it's clear that Gyalchester is one of the most fully formed songs on this project. And it's just a really simple banger. It turns, you know, the quiet piano of the last track into this really chilling and eerie, aggressive song that would fit very well on If Reading This Is Too Late, emphasised by, you know, the backer ad-libs, as well as the really catchy rapped hook, which is a rarity for Drake. He doesn't usually do that. And I know he's gone on record saying in the past that he has gone out of his way to try and make more songs like this that can be performed at live shows without having to sing them, to try and replicate the sort of energy, I guess, that a track like Jet the Throne's Paris elicits, for example. I'd say Gyalchester is a bit like a refinement, really, of the If You're Reading This sound. Really fantastic brags from Drake on this, but also some absolutely ridiculous lines that really only work for someone like Drake. The Naps line, as well as a few others, just showcase how funny of a person and funny of a writer that Drake really is. And I don't think he gets enough credit for the tongue-in-cheek stuff he does actually say. People do take him very seriously. Of course, you know, showing love for the UK and dancehall in the name of this song. Again, as I said, sequenced really well, following, you know, Blem and Madiba Riddim. And as is the norm with Drake, he often really catches the flow on the second verse, and when he does switch his flow on that second verse, it really sees him fall in sync with this beat. And despite Drake saying on, you know, several tracks preceding this and on Views, and just the overall attitude that he has, he says that, you know, he has no idea why a lot of the rap game has so much jealousy and envy, and you know, just tension directed towards him. But he clearly, when in fact he clearly baits the likes of, you know, Kendrick Lamar, Jay-Z and other MCs with that, you know, top 2 line at the end of his verse. But yeah, I think that, again, that's another example of, you know, the paranoia that he experiences turning into arrogance, which is something he mentioned on Views, and I think has pretty much continued since this time up until the present day. But yeah, Gyalchester, of course, absolute banger. Yeah, next track is Skepta Interlude, performed obviously by Skepta.
You don't know me, you better get to know me. Stand up tall, right next to Kobe. OVO, man, so unruly. South by Ride Out, no Suzuki. Got the Austin Powers, a man's extra groovy. Please. Front row jacket, tailor-made. Crackhead swag with the razor blades. You're nothing like me, I'm a fucking villain. Leave for the love of Britain, I say it how it is and no fucks are given. I'm back on tour, so what you telling me? Please.
really interesting. It's such a strange beat, especially for someone like Skepta. There's almost this weird sort of clown-like element. I don't really know where that comes from or why I get that feeling. The flutes in the production as well, while they lead really well into the next track, they also remind me of something like Pokemon or something, the soundtrack to something like that. But Skepta's performance is really fantastic, really animated, really out there, and as I said before, like gigs, unashamedly British, unashamedly UK. Again, Drake just sort of stepping away and allowing the light to shine on artists that haven't really gotten the exposure that maybe they deserved on a more global level. Obviously Drake and Skepta have worked together before, but never really on like their own track, which is still quite interesting, to be honest, that's not happened. And while this track, in my opinion, is nothing mind-blowing, again, it's a nice injection of fun in the middle of this track list, sort of showcases the more joyful side of UK rap. It's a bit of a weird placing for another interlude, just having had, you know, the Sampler track just a few tracks previously. But again, it works well, I think, in this playlist form. Usually it wouldn't, but in this format it really does work, and is a nice break from Drake and from Drake's voice, allowing him to come back in on the next track quite aggressively. But yeah, next track is Portland, featuring Travis Scott and Quavo.
My side girl got a 5S with the screen crack. I could never have a kid, then be out here still kidding around, boys playing around. Fuck being rich when I'm 40, man, I'm trying to make it now. Hell no, never let a nigga ride your wave. No way. Quavo, young nigga, I invented you. Ike Turner with the left hand, Griselda Blanco with the trap move. I spit the 50 on the chain. You spit your last 50.
And then Travis just owns it.
We gon' go live, yeah. Flood my roller, told my bitch, let's go snorkel. Yeah, no, I did not sound with Jay, but I still send a title away. Yeah, it's lit at the crib, you can stay. Me and Drake kick like kid and play. I guess, for the fuck shit, I'm biased.
So Portland kind of continues the more fun portion of this project. Quavo's performance is serviceable, I guess, on the hook and on his verse, although pretty charismatic. Drake comes out the gate flying in that first verse, like he had something to get off his chest, really. He seems quite angry on the verse too. But the line he says about he could never have a kid and still be out here playing around is obviously now in hindsight so ironic, and lines that haven't particularly aged that well. At the time, it seems as though they're shots towards the likes of Chris Brown, who had obviously had a child around this time, as well as Jay-Z, who obviously had kids too, as well as Tory Lanez, and the line towards the end about being 40 and being rich does kind of hint towards Jay-Z. As I said earlier, I think they do patch things up just before Scorpion, as well as in 2018, as far as I'm aware. There's a few Tory disses in that verse, but I personally think that the entire track is stolen by a really outstanding Travis Scott performance. The beat changes when he comes in, just really draws you into his own world, as well as a really fantastic flow, some really great lines, again referencing Jay-Z. He just really owns the song. His mic presence around this time period really took on a life of its own. Mic presence is something that Drake has often had, I think, as you know, charisma on the mic is something that he's had in spades. And while Quavo has had it in, you know, fits and spurts throughout his career, I think around this time period in 2017, Travis really sort of ascends in rap, and I think his mic presence has only got better and better ever since this moment, really. And I think this song is probably most important in probably to marking the beginning of Travis Scott's rise to the upper echelons of, you know, the current rap game. But anyway, Portland, great, as I said, you know, the flutes keep things consistent with the last track, and they're really just banging instrumental from Murder Beats. And another one to add to Drake and Travis Scott's joint catalogue. And now, of course, we are going to split this review into part 1 and part 2, this being part 1. Copyright is an absolute pain in getting these sort of later Drake projects on YouTube, so by splitting them up, it's the easiest way to do it, really, and get as much of the actual songs in the videos as I possibly can. Obviously, we'll stop here and we'll pick up in part 2 with the next track called Sacrifices. If you have enjoyed the video, please do drop it a like. Subscribe to the channel to make sure that you're the first notified when part 2 does come out. That all said, please do join me in part 2. Hope to see you there. And if you've missed any of the previous Drake reactions, do check the playlist linked in the description box below. But yeah, in part 2, I'll take you through the second half of the album, which contains 2 of maybe my favourite Drake songs ever, definitely in my top 10. I'll let you know when we get to them, as well as give you my final thoughts on the project. But yeah, until then, see you there.